To begin with, playwrights. What is the job of the playwright? This can look like a lot of different things, but most importantly, the first job of the playwright is to write the play. And writing the play involves, first, of course, a lot of knowledge of how plays are made, how they're put together, things that you're starting to learn in this course. But they'll think about who the characters are, why they're telling this play, how they're telling this play, how they put the story together, which moments of the story make the best version of the script, so on and so forth. And that is a job that requires quite a bit of skill and in both writing and research, and an deep understanding of the human spirit and what makes a story interesting. Next, the playwright will revise the play. And this process can be a very short or a very drawn out process over time to make the play as clear and as good as it possibly can be. And sometimes a playwright will have a full Broadway production of the play and decide 10 or 15 years later that they're no longer happy with what it looks like, or the world has changed and their play is no longer as relevant or speaking to the issues that the playwright wants it to speak to, and they'll revise it. This happened very recently with David Henry Hwang, who wrote one of the small group plays, Yellow Fever. His play, M. Butterfly, which he wrote in the 80s, he revised recently and is having a revival performance now, but it's not just the original script, as you can read today. It is a new revision of the play that speaks to different ideas of gender and the words that we're using now that we weren't using in the 80s. Often, a playwright will revise the play through a workshopping process. As we've talked about several times, a play is not meant to be just read, but meant to be read aloud. And one of the things that a workshopping process allows is that a playwright gets to hear and sometimes see the play staged, so that they can see what's working and what's not, and revise what's not working and keep what is working. And a workshop can look like a couple of different things. It can be a staged reading where actors have scripts in hands, they're unmemorized, but they are working out what happens on stage. It can be a fully staged production, but with minor technical requirements. So maybe it doesn't have sets, or it doesn't have a full orchestra, or it doesn't have the full amount needed. Maybe it doesn't have costumes, just a couple ideas of it. A workshop could be as simple as a workshop reading where the playwright and a director and a bunch of actors sit around a table and talk a play out loud just to hear it and hear what actually happens in this play and what's working. This process is integral to making plays that are good and that make sense and that have worked out some of the issues that keep a play from being as good as it can be. And finally, a playwright, during initial productions of the play, before it really becomes the piece that it will often be in the rehearsal process of premieres of their works. And during that rehearsal process, they'll also be listening to actors, getting feedback from directors and designers, and changing parts of their play as they go along. This is not to say that they're going to totally rewrite a role for an actor or a director, but they may, in the collaborative process, they may acknowledge that what the actor is offering is better than what they wrote, or is different, or lets them think about the character or the play in a new way. And so the playwright can offer new pages and new writing throughout that rehearsal process. Finally, a playwright has to market their play. It's not enough just to write a play and hope that someone will put it on. A playwright has to network and submit their play to a variety of different theaters in this country that are designed to produce new work. And that's part of the way that their work gets seen and then gets produced, and playwrights earn an income. Additionally, a playwright will then get an agent or a firm who deals with collecting fees for performances, known as the rights. It's because once a play gets produced, or if you have a couple of plays that are being produced, it can become really difficult for the playwright to do that on their own. So they'll have an agent or a firm that will deal with licensing fees so that plays can be produced. And that you don't always have to contact the playwright to get the fees. You can just contact the agent, and there's a system in place. Next, we're going to talk about the process of getting a play produced on Broadway. The first step of getting a play produced on Broadway is, of course, to write the play. And we've just talked about how that process works. And it's important in the American theater to get a play produced on Broadway because often if a play is not produced either on Broadway or off Broadway, which is the theaters that are a little bit removed from the actual street of Broadway, it's very difficult for them to then be published. And if a play is not published, it is harder to get it taught in classes, like a class that you're in. And if it's not taught in classes, then it's very unlikely that it will continue to get produced outside of that. So getting to Broadway is a pretty major step for most American playwrights. So, step 1, write the play. Step 2, convince a theater or company to do a workshop reading, which we talked about a little bit. The important thing about getting a theater or company to do this for you instead of just getting a group of friends around is that when you get a workshop production with a major theater company, what can happen is that then they'll have an invited audience, which might involve some producers or other people who can move the play to the next step, which is step 3, getting a regional theater to produce the play or to get Broadway producers involved with an out-of-town tryout. We'll explain what this is a little bit in the example in the next slide. So once you get that out-of-town or regional theater production, and regional theaters are major theaters in cities across the country that produce a variety of plays, like Cincinnati Playhouse would be a major regional theater. They're important because they often produce new works and they give the space for playwrights to get these plays produced so that they can be seen and brought to Broadway if they do very well. Finally, step 4 is if your play gets that good reception elsewhere, you may then get your play produced on Broadway, but you'll need to get a bunch of producers involved, and it's a big money business that involves a lot of people doing a lot of different jobs. So, on that note, let's look at an example of how this might work with Lin-Manuel Miranda's musical In the Heights. Lin-Manuel Miranda, who you might know from Broadway's Hamilton, which we watched in our first in-class, a little bit of in our first class together. Miranda began writing this musical when he was in college at Wesleyan University, and he finished the first draft of the show in 1999 when he was a sophomore in college. So he was in a college class, and I believe he was working on this on his own. He was a theater major. And he wrote a play in college that then made it to Broadway. So just have that in mind, as this is a thing that maybe somebody you know in your college class might be working on right now. He was able to use his resources on campus to do a production of his show through a student-driven group in 2000. An alum of the Wesleyan program saw it and asked Miranda to keep working on it with an eye for Broadway. So he was a junior when that happened. Then it went into a process of revision and development, like we've talked about. Miranda continued to develop the script on his own and revise it, but the book needed more work than he was able to do, and so he brought on a collaborator. In 2004, he brought on playwright Chiara Alegria Hudes to write the book. You can see a picture of Miranda, who also originated the lead in this play, as well as the lead in Hamilton. That's the thing that he does. He writes work for himself. And there is Hudes over here. In 2005, the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center accepted the play for the National Musical Theater Conference for further development. This is a major workshop production. This allowed Broadway producers to come see it. It gave them space and time and labor to create the piece. Then in 2007, In the Heights opened off-Broadway. The press that it got from the Eugene O'Neill Center helped boost its sales. It had a great off-Broadway run. And then on March 9th, 2008, In the Heights premiered on Broadway. So we can see that it moved from writing through development, through workshop. And I'm sure he had many workshops between his 2000 production and the Eugene O'Neill performance in 2005. And so this whole process took about 9 years and the labor of many artists and producers to get it to where it is. After getting to Broadway, this is sort of the impact that In the Heights had. So getting to Broadway, In the Heights was then able to be nominated for Tony Awards, sort of the Oscars of the Broadway theater world, and it won 4 Tony Awards, including Best Musical. The musical has then had a long run on Broadway. It toured nationally and internationally. It's still touring, and it's fast becoming a staple in high schools and colleges as a production that people can do. Miranda's career opportunities expanded. After In the Heights, he won a MacArthur Genius Award. He wrote Hamilton, and he wrote the music for Disney's Moana. And Hudis won a Pulitzer for her play Water by the Spoonful. The road from writing to production is long, and it requires the efforts of many people because theater is inherently a collaborative act. A playwright cannot make a play become a stage classic all on its own. It takes the labor of so many people to make it real. You'll next watch a selection from an interview with August Wilson with Charlie Rose in 1992, in which he talks about his goals in playwriting, sort of the why he feels compelled to write plays. And he'll begin to discuss some of the issues of getting different kinds of plays produced. After that, we'll come back together and you'll watch a video about Eugene O'Neill and his legacy. And we'll touch back on what the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center is, which is where In the Heights was developed.